So let's say you have a website and it's just text. We need a way to style it. Today, we're going to review inline styling and formatting to add a little bit more spice to that website. So if you've joined us throughout the series, we previously built a website using just headers and paragraphs. Today we're going to learn how to style that website using inline styling and formatting. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and go to our CodePen profile if you've decided to save your code. And from here, we'll be able to access our old code. Now, in this case, I actually don't want to just open the previous code we had. What we're going to do is go ahead and open up a new pen for ourselves, open up the old one, copy, and then paste into the completely new one. That way we have different versions we can look at throughout our history of building a web page, and with this we'll be able to see the progress we make throughout the series. So if you've joined along for our previous videos, by this point you should be clear on what an element is, what a tag is, and how an entire element looks all together. If not, I'll go ahead and highlight it real quick right here on my screen. But in either case, I want you to actually just look at this website and think to yourself, what can we do to improve this web page? Off the top of my head, I can think already that I definitely want to change this font. It's kind of ugly looking. Maybe add some color. Maybe I'll make certain titles bigger than they already are. I'll break the rules. I'll tell the computer that I want my H1 to not be 32 pixels, but maybe 64. So, pause the video right now. Take a second to think to yourself, how will I improve my own web page? And once you've got a list of things together, go ahead and unpause after this point, and we'll get started on how we can change this website using inline styling and formatting. So if you're all done thinking about how you want to improve this site, let's go ahead and start with how we're going to make this happen. So we know about elements, we know about tags, and we know about opening and closing tags and how together they form an entire element. Now, we're going to learn about element attributes. When it comes to element attributes, you can kind of think of them as the properties for an element. So, let's look at the scientific table, right? Hydrogen is lighter than anything else, and that is its property just because it is lacking more atoms in its structure. Electrons, sorry. But in either case, you can think of an element property in the same way that you could think of someone's shirt, right? The property of the shirt could be what it's made of, its color, how large it is, how small it is. In the case of elements, we can actually go ahead and get literally inside of the element and modify it this way. So, for most element attributes, you'll usually find yourself typing right here, if you're looking at my screen, right before the closing bracket for the opening tag. So sorry if that's confusing, hopefully you're seeing exactly where my key is right now, and I'm going to go ahead and start typing what a usual element attribute would look like. One of the most common ones you'll find is usually a style if you're using inline styles. So here with this, we have an H1 that has a property of style. In just a second, we'll actually review how we can use this format right here to add some color, add a different type of format, add a different size for our font using just this. Now, it is important to note the exact syntax we used here. So we start by typing style inside of the H1 opening tag, and we follow it with an equals mark, which is then followed by these two quotation marks. In this case, they can be either single or double, But think of these as a container inside of a container. We're telling the computer that we want to give the element a certain property, and we're going to have that be equal to whatever is inside of these two quotation marks. So again, single or double is fine. My preference usually lands towards the double, but in either case, we're going to go ahead and start using the same syntax that we use in CSS to begin with the styling in this case. Alright, so before we get into exactly how to use style tags, I want to give you guys a bit of advisory. CSS has different syntax than HTML. So in this case, we're going to use a syntax that primarily uses the symbols of colons and semicolons. Now, you can kind of think of these as, actually I'm just going to go ahead and type out the syntax for you. When it comes to CSS, we're going to, or even in this case where the CSS is inside of the HTML, we're going to see a pattern of a property. So for our first example, we'll actually use height, but we're going to type in height. You know what? We'll actually do color, and with color, we'll follow it, the property, with the colon, so that our code knows we have our property. Next, I'm looking for something else, and that something else could be red. What if we want to add another property though? We need a way to tell the computer that red isn't going to be the rest of everything. So, just like we have the opening and closing tags for HTML, we're going to type out a semicolon, and like that, that's it. We have our whole CSS rule. So I'm going to go ahead and copy, cut, and paste this right in here, and like that, our Breath of the Wild is red. So go ahead and look at your list. Think about the changes you've wanted to make, and so far, just based on color, see if there's any items you want to change in the context of color on your web page. I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video, but for the time being, just watch as I choose what items I want to change the color of, and then we'll go ahead and touch on some other properties that can be changed through our inline styling. So, as you can see, I've color-coded my different headers in order to denote different properties about them. So, I have the title of Breath of the Wild in blue, the mission, the tools in blue, and then the header for the enemies in red, just color-coding things essentially. That's all we're doing as of right now. But let's go ahead and actually look at how we can add multiple rules to a single item, as well as the different rules that we can explore using inline CSS. So really, the possibilities are everything that we can do inside of CSS, but I'm going to go ahead and touch on about 5 different options that will be really useful in this use case. So first, I'm going to actually start with some formatting. First, so in that case, we'll have our alignment, text alignment specifically. Right now, automatically in HTML, our text will align to the left because it's supposed to read like a book. If you had text and it automatically centered or went to the right, everyone would think your program was messed up. So it automatically sets it to the left. But for right now, but with text align, we can actually override that rule, and we'll tell the text in our code to align center. And like that, our Breath of the Wild is in front and center in the middle. So let's go ahead and work through this and center all of our objects like this if you would like to do that with all your material. But I know I'm going to speed the video up again just to reformat all of this. So now I've got all of my elements centered in the middle of my screen. And I gotta say, this is the most 90s looking website I've ever seen. You just have centered colored text with really no substance behind it. Just some text, information that you can read. But let's go ahead and just review the rest of the properties that we can look over. And actually, as you look over at our code, you can see that something that was really simple to begin with has suddenly become a lot more complicated, and it's going to constantly be scaling at a rate similar to this. But throughout the series, we'll actually learn a couple of tricks to simplify all of this code. So alongside our text alignment, we can also do things like changing the size. So I'm going to go ahead and change the font size. And in this case, let's change the font size of Breath of the Wild from 32, like I had stated earlier, to 64. And let's see, and like that, our Breath of the Wild is suddenly massive. And then following that, we'll actually go ahead and change the background color. So background dash color for our background color property, and we'll follow it with the color green. And you're probably thinking to yourself, how does the computer know whether what I'm typing in when I say a color? Because so far I've just been typing in colors like green, red, and blue. There's actually a giant library of colors that you can just type in and have automatically show when it comes to HTML and CSS. But in this case, we'll just stick to these plain colors because we're actually going to touch on a certain type of code called hexadecimal that will allow for us to choose different colors in an exact color in just a couple of episodes. But as of right now, we're going to go back to our background color, and then we'll actually also look into the size? No, margin actually, because I think this should be pushed away from everything else. So what's a margin? A margin is kind of like that extra space you see on the outside of things. So even just looking at this web page, we have, let's say, this space between the green and my code editor is a margin. So I'm going to go ahead and add another margin just for our Breath of the Wild element. And I'm going to say this one is 30 pixels. And you're going to see a little change where suddenly the box shrunk. Why did the box shrink? Well, we added this invisible border outside going 30 pixels in each direction so that nothing can touch it, and we can actually use this for 100 different reasons. We can use it for the reason of pushing something to the left, because we can specify that we only want a margin on the left, like so. Or we can use it to center things. We can use it to push something away from another thing, or we can use it to keep space between items. But enough with the styling. We've learned how to center things, we've learned how to color things, we've learned how to give things background. Now we're actually going to learn some new tags to enter into our code that will probably be a bit more appropriate for styling with just text. So this is, even though these are elements, they're considered formatting when it comes to the world of HTML. So for my tools, you can see that I have them as H4s, even though they shouldn't be headers. They're items underneath a header. So what I'm going to do to actually give them some emphasis without having them be larger is change them to an element called B. What is B? B is just the style for something bolded. So I'm going to go ahead and change all of these to B's. And with that, like that, all of these are now lined up and styled. And why did they float to the left? We'll touch on that we'll actually touch on that in a future episode. So today we've learned how to style things using inline styling through element properties, and also how these different properties can work. Now, for you guys, I'd suggest actually going to some websites and looking at all the different changes and all the different properties that you can change, and all of the property values that you can give those properties. But next time around, we'll actually be looking into why these B elements, or these bolded elements, like to shift to the right, why things format the way they do in HTML, and how we can become masters of controlling those things. So, before we go, I actually want to challenge you to make something that looks better than what I have built out here, which shouldn't be too hard, but take some time. Try and design something robust. Try and design something that would make someone go, ooh, just by looking at it. So, let's see if you can have that built out by next time.